Welcome, everyone. I'm Brainerd Carey. You probably know me through maybe some of these posts, but also this is a book I wrote that's very popular. The Art World Demystified. I've written 5 other books for artists on different topics. I'm also a professional artist myself, was in the Whitney Biennial and a number of other high-profile shows. But today I'm talking about artist statements. I'm a big proponent of artist education, developing artist careers. Where I'm drawing from, just to be clear about my background and where I'm pulling information from, is not just my experience as a professional artist, but on Yale University Radio, I've interviewed over 1,100 artists, curators, and others from the visual arts and performing arts and generally the arts world, the art world, and I've asked them how they manage their careers, how they do what they do. So I'm pulling a lot of information from that as well. And today I want to talk about the artist statement. The artist statement is something that you'll need when applying for residencies, when applying for grants. Sometimes galleries ask for it. And it's a really kind of vexing piece of writing. And I want to talk a little bit about its history and how to approach it. So the artist statement is fairly new to artists and the world of artists. That was an invention that came around in the 70s, 80s, and became the norm in a kind of post-80s environment. And the reason was that artists would be submitting for, in post-70s work or 70s work, early 80s work, artists who were doing conceptual work that perhaps couldn't be photographed very easily would want to give an explanation in their applications. So if you're applying to a grant, you're applying to a residency, and your work is about like ghosts and sounds and things that can't be seen or heard, or your work involves an installation that's kind of immersive and photographs don't cover it, you need to create an artist statement, thus the artist statement, right? Which is, what do you need to say? Do you need to tell us something about this artwork to help us to better understand it? So that was really the idea. That's where it came from, when art could no longer be completely understood by its image or details of its image in things like sound installations, immersive visual installations, sculptural installations. There are instances where images are not enough. So the artist statement was born. But now, ever since the 80s, 90s, and everything forward of that till now, it's just the norm on every application, artist statement. Put your artist statement here. And of course, the question is, what is an artist statement? Is it, why I'm making art, why you're making art? Is it a manifesto? Is it an explanation of what your art means? All of those things sound awful, right? You don't want to write any of those things. You're an artist, not someone who wants to like decode and write their work. So there's been a number of people who talk about how to write an artist statement, best practices. And of course, I've written a lot about it in my books. But today, I want to give you another fresh angle on it. A lot of people talk about it's your story, tell your story. Or coming at it from, why are you doing what you're doing? So I want to take a few of those off the table, right? When it comes to an artist statement, one thing I would stay away from is why you are making art. You are making art most likely for the same reasons everyone else is making art. Maybe there's psychological dimensions, psychic dimensions, there's philosophical dimensions, but basically everyone's making art for the same reason. They have a message that they want to put out into the world somehow, and they're hoping that message will do some good, whether it's to make people feel better, to be confronting, whatever it is, it's messages. Artists have messages to put out into the world. So I would just skip entirely the idea of approaching an artist statement in terms of why you're making art, because that's something in common with everybody, and anybody that's in a position to review your application, like a residency or a grant, is going to know why you make art. It's a similar impulse to other artists. So don't use that approach. And the approach of tell your story is also a bit of a prosaic approach. It should be short. It should be like 300 words or less. So your story can end up being kind of long. and in most cases may not be entirely appropriate. So what I would suggest in terms of writing an artist statement that doesn't kill you, that doesn't become this incredibly annoying process, is to talk about how you're building your work, your process itself. Talk about what you're doing in the studio. You start with ideas and move to something else. Do you move between mediums? Talk about how the marks you make, how the sounds you make, how the ideas that you create come together to make something. And I'm talking about just the straight out facts of the situation. I'm using encaustic paint. I always start with heated panel, or I start with a drawing that I've made that I'm going to trace onto it, or something like that. Talk about the bare bones of what it is that you do. That's one avenue of writing an artist statement, right? Just talk about your process. No philosophy, no story, just your process. Okay, another way to approach it, which is a little more of a highbrow way, right? So there's either talk about your process, and I'm talking about bare bones of how you paint, what you put together, and if there's content that you're making, if it's figurative, talk about how that comes together and what the final result is. Just we're talking about process, bare bones. We're not talking about what it means. You're trying to draw a figure in a landscape. This is the process you use. You're drawing from life or from photographs, and the process ends up being about a lone figure in a landscape, which the viewer can draw their own meaning from. You don't have to explain the meaning, but this is your process. Okay. Angle number 2 is make an analogy. This is a really easy one that takes everything off your back. So let's say you're reading a book about everything from biological diversity to, I don't know, something anthropological, or you're reading a novel, popular novel or a classic novel or an unknown novel, short story by, a writer like Clarice Lispector, someone who's unknown but extraordinary. She's not unknown, but there's a lot of writers out there that I'm sure you've read or are interested in, or there may be a movie that you've seen that you think, wow, I love where this writer's coming from. What you can do then is, instead of writing the artist statement about who you are and what you're doing, you can write it about a book you've read and why that parallels your art making process. Right? Clarice Lispector writes sometimes stories about her process painting and using words, and the difficulty between, the symbols of words and the symbols that are used in paintings. You could refer to her story and talk about it in terms of, this is what I'm struggling with as well. This is my journey. There could be another writer, another movie that you've seen that somehow you feel like is inspiring, and also lets the viewer know, if you were to use that as an analogy to what you're doing, something more specific about what it is that you do. So in other words, you're not talking about your work. You're talking about someone else's story and relating it to your own work, right? A common one is talking about alchemical processes, the ideas of turning, a useless material into a beautiful material. So, the sort of quest, the medieval quest for the longest time has been, can we turn lead into gold? Is this possible? That's sort of like the dream. It's like having a money tree, but it seems almost possible with chemical means. Well, if you think about it, with art, you could use that analogy, like an alchemist. I'm turning like rubbish, garbage, paint that has no value on its own into something gorgeous, right? That's what Da Vinci did. That's what, all modern artists do. We're alchemists. Now, I'm not saying to use that specific thing, but there's an example of an analogy, right? Of an ancient alchemical dream quest, that seems mythical and impossible. But as artists, we're actually doing that today. We're taking raw materials and turning them into arguably gold. Not only because the image is something potentially gorgeous to behold, but because in today's world, in today's art market, art sometimes sells for, or frequently, almost universally sells for much more than gold, right? That's just one analogy. I'm not saying to run with it at all. So again, just to recap, because today's brief talk here is just about the artist statement. I would generally say to avoid it if possible. You don't have to put it on your website. Artist statement is an important piece of information that's often required when applied. So either do it in one of two methods. Don't talk about why you make art. Don't do that. Talk about either with an analogy, like I gave with alchemical processes, an analogy from a book, a movie, a poem that you read, why your art is represented that way. So you're presenting an idea and then aligning yourself with that idea. The other way is to talk straight about process. This is how I build my work. I start with a sketch, I do this, I do that, I bring in this idea and that idea, and the finished product ends up being this. Something really clear. Again, 300 words or less. I'll give another talk about bios because I know that's of interest to a lot of people. And that's all for today. If you're not part of, I have something called Praxis Center for Aesthetics, which is an online school for artists where we get into detail about a whole variety of things, from applying for grants to writing. And in that group, were you to join it, there's not only support for what you're doing, there are also editors in that group. So you'll have your artist statement, your bio professionally edited. I'll comment on it. I'll comment on your website, all kinds of things, but also you will have those pieces of writing professionally edited. If you're in the group, so excited to have you in there. If you're not in the group, there'll be links below this so that you can join the group if you'd like and take a look at what it's like. It's a monthly fee. You can stay 1, 2 months, 10 months. Most people hang on because the support in that group is amazing. Artists all commenting on each other's work, supporting each other when things are difficult, and congratulating each other when they achieve great things, which is happening all the time in the group. So again, I want to thank you guys for listening today. If you have any comments, let me know. If you have suggestions for other videos you'd like to see, please let me know and I'll produce them. Until then, I want to thank you all for doing the art you're doing, because it's my feeling that artists are movers and changers in this world. Without art, this world would clearly be a less exciting place. And artists are individuals that can genuinely change society by understanding how other people see and bringing us all a little further along into their worlds, which allows us all, I believe, to be a little closer together, brings us a step closer to peace. Whether your work is about confronting difficult issues or it's about just simply beautiful imagery. That's what I believe in terms of art, that we're all, in a sense, a kind of a shaman or miracle worker or alchemist, however you want to put it. And it has the ability to bring people together, no matter what the content is. So that's a pretty noble task, a pretty noble profession in my mind. I want to thank you all for being here today. And again, if you have any suggestions for other talk topics, let me know. And there's links in here if you want to join the group and get support and writing edited. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.